Last time we talked about what goes on in the interview itself, what your body language is supposed to be, what you're supposed to say, what you're supposed to do, what you're not supposed to do. Are you supposed to be bold or cautious? Are you supposed to insult them? Are you supposed to wear a red shirt or a purple shirt or no shirt at all? All that kind of thing. And actual interviews have a lot of problems, but they're not by any means the worst part of the process. If you actually get into one of these situations, be it a phone or an in-person interview, you can normally feel out the other person a bit. You can kind of get a grasp of what their personality is, what their body language is. You can kind of get a bit of an idea how far you can go with joking. Like there are aspects to it that you can kind of figure out. And even if you don't really know what they're looking for, you can at least give kind of a general statement about your qualifications. Like maybe tell me about yourself. Maybe they're looking for something exciting about you, but you can talk about your previous job and how it relates to this. So that's like at least something good. It may not be ideal, but you're at least approximating something that will help you. That's not the issue though. The issue is getting into the actual interview and how many interviews are and the time in between them. The interview process, such as it is, works or rather doesn't work on its own logic. And that's to, I think, a large extent because it's a power dynamic you don't really see in many other places. Like if you're dealing with government in a lot of cases, particularly if you're dealing with politicians, the power dynamic is not quite as unbalanced as you might think. A lot of members of parliament or representatives or congressmen or whatever will take calls from their constituents because they need them to get reelected. So there is a bit of a power there. You have a little bit of a power even with like your bank because they don't want you to withdraw your money. When it comes to the job market, though, the employer has 100% of the power, and they can basically make you do whatever they want, and there's no recourse and there's no counterbalance because generally speaking, you need the job. Now, I just want to say up front, I'm not bashing the idea of having it. Of course, you should have job interviews. You have to find out if the person's who they say they are. You have to find out if their resume is real. You have to pre-screen people to make sure that they're like real candidates. Even doing like an assessment to make sure the person has basic like writing and reading skills. Like none of these things bother me. If I ran a business, I'd do them myself. My issue is kind of the cruel and callous and incompetent and responsibility avoiding nature that goes into these things, which often will just turn them into a disaster. And they're very often I find cruel and unfair on the people who get involved with it. So let's just jump right into the process. So we're going to skip over job applications. That could be a whole other video, and maybe I'll do one on that. Because in the past, I've had to do like hour-long personality tests to submit an application for a minimum wage job. There was a guy in my Discord server the other day who was doing one of those. So we're going to skip over that. So you've submitted your application. Now, what happens next really depends. And it can go from I've gotten calls a day after I've applied to something to like 3 months after I've applied to something. And I guess it kind of is in the employer's pocket. You've submitted the application, but they haven't contacted you. They haven't made any sort of commitment to you personally or to your candidacy. So if they never get back to you, that's fine. That's reasonable to me. They looked at your resume, they said, no, this guy isn't qualified, and they'll push you to one side. So then what happens is if they're kind of interested, you normally get booked for a screening interview. Now, not always. One time I was given a book that I think was like 130 pages, and I had to read the book, and then I had to answer a timed questionnaire on content from inside of the book, and I failed that one. I guess I just didn't read the book well enough. But that's the kind of thing involved. So what happens is they normally contact you, and then you have to set up a screening interview. Now, one of my biggest issues with the whole thing is, by and large, companies will not interview you outside of normal business hours. And I guess you'd be going, well, Argent, they're doing you a favor by interviewing you to begin with, so you shouldn't expect them to do it outside. But I don't know, if you're working a job and you're trying to find another job, is that really like how you want to start it off with? To try to like pressure the potential employee into lying to their current employer, like making up a reason that they have to go out, especially if they force them to do an in-person interview. As I've said, I've had to take days off work in the past, days I haven't been paid. Maybe I don't have a sick day or I don't have a personal day to go do that. So generally speaking, so they're asking a lot of time and money from you on the up the outset of most of these. So generally what happens is you have a screener. So this is either a recruiter or someone from HR. And they will call you and they'll normally have a 10-minute interview, 10 to 15. And this is fine. Generally speaking, what they're doing is A, can you like speak in complete sentences? B, do you understand what the job is and what the company is? C, what are your like basic qualifications? What is your basic background? Expand a bit on your resume. Once again, I'm 100% fine with this. This is a logical first step. It's so that they aren't wasting your time and you're not wasting their time. And that's happened to me in the past where I do that screener and I don't think I'm going to want to work at the company, but then I want to proceed, or I do the screener and then I don't want to proceed further. So then after that, you normally have to do a second interview. Now, sometimes this is a second screening interview. What happened to me once was after the screening interview, I had to use an online interview website because this is like the thing now. It's something the kids like to do. You have to do like these video interviews, and I don't really have a webcam, so I just have to use the one on my laptop. So this one I had to do for this one company, it was a website. And how it worked was the website hooked up to your camera and it would give you a question, and then they give you 20 seconds to think, and then you'd have 30 seconds to record a response to the question. And it didn't really work. It didn't really work with any of and I have several mics because I record these videos. It didn't really work with any of my mics. It looked like crap. It sounded like crap. It was absolutely horrible. And the program didn't even work properly. So what wound up happening is the first question, which was why do you want to work at this company, got skipped. And I wasn't able to go back. And then I talked to their tech support. Obviously, it was some dude from India who didn't really speak English. And I was like, look, it skipped the question. I needed to be able to answer that question. Will I be able to go back and change my answers? He's like, yes, you'll be able to go back. You'll be able to change your answers. Don't worry about it. I'm like, are you sure? This is a very important question. Are you sure I'm going to be able to go back and do this at the end? Yes, you'll be able to. Don't worry about it. So then I went through the rest of it and it was really crappy. So I got to the end and then it submitted it. And I'm like, I didn't get a chance to change it. He's like, oh, you can't change it after a question's done. I'm like, well, you just told me that. And he's like, he just ignored me and he just kind of kept saying, oh, we'll talk to the recruiter. They'll contact you if they need an answer to that question. If they don't get back to you in a day or two, it means that they don't need that answer. I'm like, well, they want me to use this stupid dysfunctional website and I'm not even allowed to answer the single most important question because the tech support doesn't know what the hell they're doing. And once again, this is just wasting your time. What is up with this? They're trying to be fancy. They're trying to be hip and cool by having this fucking interview video recording nonsense. So anyways, yeah, so then we do that. Then you'll often have an in-person interview. Although there's been cases where I've had 2 to 3 phone interviews. What I might have is HR, then the HR from that department, or maybe a recruiter and then HR from that department, and then somebody who actually works in that department. And then you'll have an in-person interview, and then you'll have an assessment, and then you'll have another interview. I think the furthest I've ever gone was, I think it was 7 rounds. There was 3 phone interviews, I think 2 online screeners, an assessment, and then an in-person interview. And at the end of that, they called me up and they said, "Oh, the position's changed. The position's changed. We're gonna have to restart the interview process all over again. Would you like to be considered?" I'm like, "Did you? Do I have to redo like everything, or is some of the material still relevant?" They're like, "No, you have to redo everything." And I'm like, "Thanks. I'd rather be unemployed." And I didn't say that, but I just said, "No, I don't want to proceed at this time." And that's the kind of thing, like, that's pretty commonplace. I've had that happen numerous times, where I've gone through all this, and it irritates me, and it does hurt. It's not even that you're getting invested; it's that a lot of the time, it's very clear they have no intent to hire you. A lot of the time what happens is the company, particularly if it's like the government or something, already has a candidate in mind. They're going to hire a specific person, or they're going to hire someone internally. But to fulfill some corporate regulation or some like anti-corruption measure, they have to have a fake competition on it. So they already know who they're going to hiring. They already know that it's not going to be you, but they'll have you come in, they'll put up the job posting, they will make you go through all these stages knowing there is a 0% chance that they'll hire you at the end. And I've seen a lot of people defend this by saying, "Oh, well, they might decide they need you for some other position. It's always worth going." And like, well, no, it isn't. It's a waste of your time. It's a waste of your money, because time is money, and you might have to commute. Like, you might have to not work for a day, or you might have to give up doing something else to go to this interview. And it's, to me, I think it's extremely immoral. I think it should be illegal, actually. I don't know how you'd enforce it, but I think, like, on the books, it should be, it's illegal to advertise an interview for a job that you know you're not going to hire someone for. Because I think that's, in most cases, it's to meet a quota or something like that. So that's part of it. Another really fun thing that I've had happen multiple times is, okay, so they have the job posting up, and then you're going through the interview process, and it goes down, of course, because it's expired. And then as you're going through the interview process, they put the job posting back up. And they say, we're looking for someone to fulfill this position. And you're like, well, why are they advertising for this if they just finished getting a bunch of applications and getting a round of interviews? So basically, in most cases, that's saying they aren't going to hire you. They just have to continue on for the sake of, I don't know, to fulfill, like I said, some quota or something. But really, this is just what I'd almost consider to be kind of sociopathic behavior. If not at an individual, certainly at an organizational level. It's like, and people will say, "Oh, Argent, life isn't fair. Oh, Argent people are crappy." And I'm like, well, but that's just an excuse. That's an excuse for taking no moral responsibility for your actions and acting like a sociopath. Like, okay, life isn't fair, but like, to quote Catelyn Stark, when Jaime asks her, why, if the gods are so great, why is the world such a shithole? And she goes, because of men like you. And it's true. It's like, okay, the world's unfair. Why is it unfair? Largely because of shitty people. And just giving that a pass under some vague thing about life being bad is not productive, and it's not going to help solve any problems or make the world a better place. You have to call out this nonsense when you see it. So aside from that, there's a huge issue with transparency. Once again, job postings are something we can deal with another time, but it's generally speaking very common for companies to lie in job postings, be it about the salary, be it about the position, be it about the responsibilities, be it about the experience. It's almost always fake. And once again, it's like, okay, so the expectation here is you're supposed to start your relationship with this company, and you're supposed to want to work for them, when their first method is, like, their first contact with you is just lying to you. And I mean, that's great, right? That's the kind of thing you want. And there have been cases where I have just not proceeded with the process, because there's a Michael Savage quote I really like: "How it begins is how it goes." And that's not always true in life. Sometimes you get a bad first impression. Sometimes you get off on the wrong foot. But in a lot of cases, particularly with regards to an interview process, it's a very much a how it begins is how it goes thing. Like, one company who was actually interested in hiring me said, okay, Argent, we get that you have like 5 years of experience now, or however much it was, but we're going to have to pay you lower than your current job where you've been working for the last like 5 years or whatever and haven't gotten a raise in that time. So we're going to pay you less money than what you're working now when you're already being underpaid. And when I brought this up, they said, well, there's a lot of opportunity for advancement at this place. I'm like, is that going to be in the contract? No. Is there going to be bonuses in the contract? No. Is some sort of raise going to be in the contract? No. I'm like, well, I can't do that. I can't take this job that I'd have to move for and make less money with no legally binding guarantees. And they were like, they got upset over that, and I just kind of hung up. But like that kind of thing can happen. So there's that. The worst part, though, is the ghosting that goes on. And that's what this whole picture is a reference to. So what ghosting is basically they use their control of the situation to just not communicate with you as a way of breaking things off or a way of establishing control over you. So it can take a long time for them to go through the applications. I get that. But once they eventually kind of contact you, you set up an interview. In most cases, or maybe not most, but in about half cases I've found interviews get rescheduled very often. And it's often like the same day, and it's often like a couple minutes before I've had interviews rescheduled. And I mean, I get it, stuff happens, but sometimes for companies, it'll be like multiple times. There was one company I was working for that changed the interview time. This was an in-person, not phone. If it's phone, it doesn't really matter. 3 times in the span of one day for later in that day. And they were fairly far apart, several hours apart. And it just kind of kept getting moved around. It's like, well, if you behaved that way to them, then you wouldn't get the job. They would probably just kick you out of the process. And this, as with any time, a lot of times for interviews, they just won't show up, or they won't call you, or they won't respond, or something like that will happen. And I find that that's an extremely common occurrence. I've had that happen a lot, where they'll set up the interview, even an in-person one, and they'll be like half an hour to an hour late, or they'll just cancel it even if you're already there and you've come from a ways away. Like they can't be bothered in a lot of cases to just tell you. And like I'm fine, like I get stuff happens, but they just don't care enough in a lot of cases to tell you, and because that's how little they value you and how little they value your time. And once again, I'm not trying to be like moralistic. Well, I am trying to be moralistic. I'm not trying to be idealistic here, but is that really like the impression you want to give to people, that you're worth less than dirt to them and they couldn't send you a 5-second email? But apparently it is, and it gets worse the further you go into the process. So sometimes I've been like 3 interviews in and then they've ghosted me. They won't contact me. They won't respond to phone calls or emails. They will just completely ignore me. I remember there was one job I was applying for that required me to get security clearance. So I had to get like security clearance for this job, and getting security clearance is a real pain. You have to get like decades of stuff together, tax forms, background checks, references checks, all this kind of stuff. So I spent like weeks getting all this stuff together. I submitted it all. And then the company never got back to me. And I tried contacting them a couple times, but they had like disappeared off the face of the earth. That one was especially weird because they met me in the lobby of the building, and they were like, we can't actually let you go up to our offices. And I'm like, okay. So like that was an example of like what I'm talking about, is I had to go back and like chase down pay records from like my high school job from 10 years ago and that kind of thing. But they couldn't be bothered to get back to me. There was another company similar to that, and where I think it was the third or fourth interview, and they just ghosted me after that. Sometimes what they'll do before they ghost you is they'll be like, "Oh, you're a great candidate. You're like, we're this close to hiring you. You're at like the final round," and then they just won't ever respond to you again. And sometimes they'll be just a gap. Like they'll ghost you in that they'll say, "Oh, we'll contact you Monday to let you know what the next steps are." But they won't contact you Monday. They'll contact you like Wednesday the next week. So they could be like 10 or like 20 days behind. One job my sister got, she got called 3 months after the final interview and they offered it to her. And like, once again, I get that these things can take a while. But they don't have the decency in a lot of these cases to just say, "Look, we have kind of a backlog. Things are kind of crazy here. It might be a little while. We'll get back to you in the next couple of weeks." But they won't. Instead, they just go completely quiet on you. They won't respond to your calls or anything. Once again, it makes you feel worthless. It makes you feel like they don't give a crap about you. Now, once again, I've heard excuses for this, that you can sue them for discrimination if they give you a reason or they officially tell you why they're not going to hire you, that they're busy and they can't get back to everybody. And that's bullshit. If you're going to take somebody's time, if you're going to get them invested in this, because people will have to change their lives based on this kind of thing. Like, maybe you're interviewing them in June and the person wants to go on vacation in August, but, and this is one of the sleazy things they'll do. "Oh, what's the soonest you can start?" Like, and that's something like they'll ask during an interview. And it's like, "Oh, I guess that they're really eager about me." And then they just won't get back to you. And like, you'll not book the vacation, or you'll put something else off. Like, the expectation is basically you put your life on hold for them, and they can't even be bothered normally to tell you like what's going on. There's zero transparency. And it's the lying that bothers me, because it is a lie. There's a difference between forgetting about something or being unable to do something and lying about it. Lying about it is never having any intention to do so. If they say, "Oh, we're going to call you Monday," they probably have no intention to actually call you Monday. They're just trying to basically screw with you until you give up and go away. And like, what's the whole point of the whole thing? Is it just like a power display? Is it some kind of weird sexual fetish? Like, you'd think that the whole process would be they're trying to get somebody to hire. But they seem more concerned about establishing some sort of like social dominance over you. And once again, it's frankly kind of sociopathic in my opinion. Just how this thing goes. It shows a complete lack of respect for you as a person. And once again, maybe you're like, "Oh, Argent, you're sounding like an SJW or something." Well, it's just, there's no reason for it to be like this. It's like, "Oh, it's a dog-eat-dog world. That's why I can't shoot somebody a 5-second email and tell them you're no longer a candidate. That's why I can't give people even like a very vague general timeline. Like, we'll contact you sometime in the next month," instead of telling you we'll contact you on Monday and then never referring to it again. And that's just kind of like how the whole process works. And it's really discouraging, and people wonder why people become NEETs. And that's one of the reasons they become NEETs, is because the process is designed to beat you down. And there's no reason for it to be like that, other than just the way these people are and the way these organizations are set up. Anyways, so I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Argent.